In today's lesson, we'll be learning about transformations of quadratics. The shape of a quadratic relation is described as a parabola. A quadratic relation can take three forms: standard form, vertex form, and factored form. The variables of a, b, and c, a, h, and k, and a, r, and s all tell us important pieces of information. Today we'll be focusing on vertex form. This is our base parabola of y equals x squared. No transformations have been done. It is important to remember that all the transformations discussed today are relative to this base parabola. The first variable that we are going to discuss is the variable of a. If a is greater than 0, then the parabola opens upwards. In other words, it smiles. This is not a technical term, but this is one way of remembering. What exactly does a greater than 0 mean? This means that a must be a positive number. If a is less than 0, then the parabola opens downwards. In other words, it frowns. What exactly does a less than 0 mean? Well, this means that a must be a negative number. It is often said that it is reflected in the x-axis. The base parabola is shown in red, y equals x squared, and the newly transformed parabola is shown in blue, y equals negative x squared. The value of a happens to be -1, which means it is frowning or reflected in the x-axis. If a is less than -1 or greater than 1, then the parabola is stretched vertically. In other words, it narrows. What exactly does this mean? Well, if a is less than -1, it's going to be somewhere over here. And if a is greater than +1, it's going to be somewhere over there. The base parabola of y equals x squared is shown in red, and the newly transformed parabola of y equals 2x squared is shown in blue. The value of a is +2, which means it is being stretched vertically by a factor of 2. It is much more narrow than the base parabola. If a is greater than -1 or less than 0, then the parabola is compressed vertically. In other words, it widens. What exactly does this mean? If a is greater than -1 or less than 0, it is going to be somewhere in here. If a is greater than 0 or less than 1, then the parabola is compressed vertically. In other words, it widens. What exactly does this mean? Well, a has to be greater than 0 or less than 1, which means it has to be somewhere in here. The base parabola of y equals x squared is shown in red, and the newly transformed parabola of y equals 1/2 x squared is shown in blue. The value of a is 1/2, or 0.5, which means the value of a is between 0 and 1, which means it is compressed vertically. As you can see, the blue parabola is much wider. At this point, we're going to discuss the significance of the variable h. If h is greater than 0, then the parabola is translated to the left. What exactly does this mean? It means that h has to be greater than 0. In other words, it must be a positive number. This is slightly counterintuitive, as most people would consider going to the right positive. If h is less than 0, then the parabola is translated to the right. What exactly does this mean? Well, if h is less than 0, that means it has to be a negative number. Again, this is slightly counterintuitive, as most people would consider going to the left negative. Students often confuse the terms h and k. H must be within the brackets, and it must be squared. Our base parabola of y equals x squared is shown in red, while our newly transformed parabola y equals bracket x plus 2 bracket squared is shown in blue. The value of h happens to be positive 2, which means it is being translated to the left by 2 units. Like I said, this is slightly counterintuitive. And our other newly transformed parabola of y equals bracket x minus 2 bracket squared is shown in green. And the value of h happens to be negative 2, which means it is being translated to the right by 2 units. Again, this is slightly counterintuitive, as you would think going to the right would be positive. As mentioned beforehand, our value of h must be in brackets, and it has to be squared. Last but not least, we're going to discuss the significance of the variable k. If k is greater than 0, then the parabola is translated up. What exactly does this mean? If k is greater than 0, it must be positive, and this is very intuitive. Next, if k is less than 0, then the parabola is translated down. What exactly does this mean? Well, k must be a negative number. Again, this is very intuitive. As mentioned beforehand, many students confuse h and k. K must be located outside of the bracket, and it should not be squared. Our base parabola of y equals x squared is shown in red. Our newly transformed parabola of y equals x squared plus 2 is shown in blue. The value of k is positive 2, which means it is going to be translated 2 units upwards. Our other parabola of y equals x squared minus 2 is shown in green. The value of k happens to be negative 2, which means it is going to be transformed 2 units downwards. As you can see, these are very intuitive. Also remember that the value of k must be outside the bracket and it should not be squared.